Countess Elizabeth Báthory to Eckshid is recorded in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific female murderer in history. The accepted narrative states that she tortured and killed up to 650 young women inside her sprawling Hungarian estates. But the popular image of the Blood Countess, a Gothic vampire bathing in the gore of her victims, is an invention. That specific nightmare was stitched together centuries later, obscuring a reality defined by political scheming and massive wealth. Finding the truth requires looking past the monster myth and focusing instead on the conflicting records left by those with a direct stake in her conviction. This map of Hungary shows the borders of a volatile 16th century frontier. The Kingdom of Hungary was partitioned, trapped in a long, violent struggle between the Ottoman Turks expanding from the east and the Catholic House of Habsburg looming in the west. As shown in this period woodcut, violence was entirely normalized. Landed nobility regularly administered brutal, grotesque physical punishments to their servants and the lower classes. Under the law, minor thefts or perceived unruliness could legally result in severed limbs or burning at the stake. Born into this brutal environment in 1560, Elizabeth Báthory was highly educated, fluent in 4 languages, and raised as a Calvinist Protestant. When she married Count Ferenc Nadasdy, she took over the full management of his vast business affairs and estates while he spent years away fighting the Ottomans. As an influential and capable noblewoman, she established a gyneceum inside her castle. Families of the lesser gentry sent their unmarried daughters to this private finishing school to learn courtly etiquette, foreign languages, and household management directly from the countess. Operating effectively as an independent ruler over thousands of peasants and servants, Báthory possessed nearly unchecked, absolute authority. She held enough isolation to act out any sadistic impulse, but she also controlled enough land to become a highly lucrative target for her political rivals. By 1602, local priests began noticing an alarming trend. Young women were frequently dying inside the gyneceum. Elizabeth publicly claimed that a cholera outbreak was sweeping through her estates, but as the bodies continued piling up in local churchyards, the sheer volume of deaths caused her cover story to collapse. King Matthias II appointed the Palatine of Hungary, Georgi Thurzo, to launch an official inquiry into the Báthory estates. Over the span of a few months, Thurzo and his notaries collected more than 300 witness statements denouncing the countess. In December 1610, Thurzo raided her castle, claiming to have caught her red-handed in the middle of a torture session. Yet, despite these dramatic public claims, no physical evidence from this raid was presented in court. The countess herself was entirely bypassed by the legal system, stripped of her right to attend a trial, and quietly placed under strict house arrest. Instead of the countess, her servants faced the judges. Under intense interrogation, they confessed to aiding Báthory in horrific acts of mass murder and witchcraft. These sprawling confessions were only secured after the servants had their fingers torn out with red-hot iron pincers before being burned alive on pyres. The massive evidentiary record against Elizabeth Báthory quickly falls apart under scrutiny. Every major claim that established her reputation as a prolific serial killer relies almost exclusively on secondhand hearsay and testimonies extracted through extreme physical duress. Looking at this detailed layout of Vienna, we see the fortified stronghold of the Habsburg Empire. This was the seat of power for King Matthias II, a monarch who had inherited a massive, unpaid financial debt owed directly to the Báthory family.
The Báthorys were one of the wealthiest dynasties in Eastern Europe, controlling huge tracts of land in the semi-independent Principality of Transylvania. For the Habsburg crown, this immense localized wealth represented a direct threat. The terms of the investigation were settled in private. Elizabeth avoided execution only because her son agreed to completely cancel the king's enormous debt. We may never know if the allegations of murder were genuine or fabricated, but the prosecution itself was highly convenient. It provided the king with a lethal geopolitical weapon, allowing him to erase a crippling financial burden and neutralize a powerful rival dynasty without sparking an open rebellion in Transylvania. The political reality of the case is routinely ignored in favor of a much darker myth, the enduring legend that the countess bathed in the blood of virgin girls to preserve her youth. But a close examination of the 1611 trial transcripts reveals a glaring omission. The words bloodbath and blood drinking do not appear in any of the hundreds of witness statements, nor in any of the forced confessions. That specific detail didn't enter the historical record until 1729, over a century after her death. A Jesuit scholar named Laszlo Tarosi wrote the first published account of the case, uncritically blending the documented legal proceedings with local peasant superstitions about the undead. The defining characteristic of the Blood Countess, the very reason her name is still recognized today, is demonstrably fake. It serves as a clear demonstration of how easily complex historical events can be overwritten by sensational folklore. Modern historians treat the Báthory case with deep skepticism. While the trial was undeniably a weaponized political hit job, the sheer volume of unexplained deaths inside her gynoecium indicates that she likely possessed an unchecked extreme sadism toward the young women in her care. This chart illustrates the massive gap between the legend and trial records. The infamous count of 650 victims originated entirely from a single unverified hearsay claim. But in the actual court proceedings, that number drops down to roughly 50 specific cases. Unfortunately for her historical record, Báthory's story was first published right as a massive vampire panic swept across Eastern Europe in the early 18th century. The public appetite for macabre tales swallowed her real life whole, transforming a brutal aristocrat into a Gothic archetype. The deepest tragedy of Elizabeth Báthory is the loss of the real victims. Whatever genuine human crimes she committed against the young women of her estates will forever be obscured by the fictionalized supernatural monster that society preferred to remember. The Countess never saw the inside of a courtroom, and she never spoke on the public record to defend herself. She remained confined under strict house arrest until August 21, 1614, dying quietly at the age of 54. Even her physical presence was eventually erased. After she was buried in the local churchyard, angry villagers caused an uproar, demanding the removal of a convicted serial killer from their sacred ground. Her body was relocated, and her final resting place remains entirely lost to time. The historical record leaves us with a stark duality. The surviving evidence points to a noblewoman who brutalized the vulnerable people under her absolute control, while the legal documents reveal a widow targeted and erased by a deeply corrupt political machine. The ultimate truth of the Blood Countess is permanently out of reach. We are left studying the gaps in the historical record, a legacy that functions as a political thriller and ultimately a ghost story.